कर रहा हूँ। मेरी आवाज सुन रहे हैं?
फुल और अनम्यूट करो, अनम्यूट करो।
हेलो बालाजी सर, आप जुड़े हुए हैं, अनम्यूट करिए। मैं आपको
सर नमस्कार।
जी नमस्कार सर, आपसे जी
थैंक
जी
यू।
वो व्हाट्सएप के माध्यम से ही आपसे चर्चा होती रहती थी, आपके समाचार मिलते रहते थे।
यस सर। बट थैंक यू सो मच फॉर दिस काइंड
नहीं
इनविटेशन।
सर, आपका धन्यवाद हम लोग मान रहे हैं कि
Yeah.
आपने हमारे इस छोटे से मंच को स्वीकार किया। अभी हम लोग बस 1-2 मिनट बाद प्रारंभ करेंगे। जीतू भाई अमेरिका से जुड़ेंगे, अभी पर्यूषण पर्व में अमेरिका गए हुए हैं। अभी देख जीतू भाई जुड़े क्या अभी?
नहीं सर, अभी नहीं जुड़े। अभी नहीं जुड़े सर।
आपसे चर्चा होती रहती थी, आपके समाचार आप मंगलाचरण करके प्रारंभ करवाइए। सर का व्याख्यान में समय फिर लोग जुड़ते रहते हैं। मोहित जी आप मंगलाचरण करिए।
सभी को नमस्कार। भोगीनाथ दहलचंद इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ इंडोलॉजी के
अभी हम लोग
31
मिनट बाद प्रारंभ करेंगे। जीतू भाई अमेरिका से जुड़ेंगे, अभी पर्यूषण पर्व में अमेरिका गए हुए हैं। सर ये क्या आवाज कहाँ से आ रही है?
नहीं सर, अभी नहीं जुड़े। अभी नहीं जुड़े।
आप मंगलाचरण करके प्रारंभ करवाइए। क्या हो रहा है मोहित, देखो जरा क्यों आवाज आ रही है पीछे से?
जी सर, अब नहीं आ रही है। सभी को नमस्कार। भोगीनाथ दहलचंद इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ इंडोलॉजी के ओर से 31वीं व्याख्यान माला में आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत है। व्याख्यान से पूर्व मंगलाचरण। णमो अरिहंताणं णमो सिद्धाणं णमो आयरीयाणं णमो वज्झायाणं णमो लोए सब साहुणम् ऐसो पंचन मुक्कारो सब पाव पणाशनो मंगलाणं च सब्बेसिं पढ़मं हवै मंगलम् इंद सदवंदियाणं तिहु बड़हिद मधुर विशद वकारम अंतातीत गुणाणम नमो जिणाणम जिद भवाणम। सभी को पुनः नमस्कार। भोगीनाथ दहलचंद इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ इंडोलॉजी की ओर से 31वीं व्याख्यानमाला में आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत है। आज के हमारे इस व्याख्यानमाला में मुख्य वक्ता हैं प्रोफेसर गणपति देवरकोंडा जी, जो दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय में डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ फिलोसफी में प्रोफेसर पद पर आसीन हैं। मैं सर के परिचय के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं हमारे संस्थान के निदेशक प्रोफेसर विजय कुमार जी जैन सर को, जो पाली, प्राकृत और बौद्ध दर्शन के मर्मज्ञ विद्वान हैं। आदरणीय प्रोफेसर विजय कुमार जी सर, प्रोफेसर बालागणपति जी का परिचय। सर म्यूट करिए, अपनी अनम्यूट करिए।
सभी को नमस्कार, जय जिनेन्द्र। आज भोगीलाल लहरचंद इंस्टीट्यूट के इस 31वीं ऑनलाइन व्याख्यान माला में एक आनंद का विषय है कि एक अंतरराष्ट्रीय ख्याति विद्वान को हम सुनने जा रहे हैं। हमारे जैन परंपरा का पर्यूषण पर्व भी चल रहा है। इसमें हम लोग जो हमारे जैन एथिक्स हैं उसको डेली लाइफ में किस तरह से प्रैक्टिस भी करते हैं, तो उसी संदर्भ में आज आपका डे टू डे लाइफ के संदर्भ में बहुत अच्छा व्याख्यान होगा। आपका परिचय प्रोफेसर, आप फिलॉसफी डिपार्टमेंट दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में हैं। आपने अमेरिका विदेश से मेहता जो फ्रेंडशिप है बुद्धिज्म का सिद्धांत, उसमें पीएचडी की थी। उसके बाद आपने अभी तुरंत ही 2 साल जैमेका में जो आईसीसीआर की जो चेयर्स होती है फॉर इंडोलॉजी एंड गांधीयन स्टडीज एट द यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ द वेस्ट इंडीज जमैका, उसमें आप 2 साल तक भारत को रिप्रेजेंट करते रहे हैं। आपका विशेष अध्ययन का जो क्षेत्र है वो इंडियन फिलॉसफी तो है ही, इसके साथ ही बुद्धिज्म, इस बुद्धिज्म के साथ में फिलॉसफी एंड प्रैक्टिस और अदर एरिया में भी फिलॉसफी ऑफ रिलीजन, पॉलिटिकल फिलॉसफी, इस तरह के जो हमारे प्रैक्टिकल सब्जेक्ट हैं, जो परंपरागत से हट करके मॉडर्न दृष्टि से जो हम लोग वेस्टर्न में फिलॉसफी का अध्ययन करते हैं, जिसको हम लोग संक्षेप में कह सकते हैं अप्लाइड फिलॉसफी, इसके क्षेत्र में आपका विशिष्ट अध्ययन है। तो मैं यही समझता हूँ कि जो आपने आज का टॉपिक चुना है कि हमारा जैनिज्म डे टू डे लाइफ में हमारे जो सिद्धांत है, एथिक्स है, वो किस तरह से व्यवहारिक में उपयोगी है। मेरा व्यक्तिगत सौभाग्य रहा है कि लखनऊ में जो ICCPR की एक कथावस्तु पर वर्कशॉप हुई थी, उसमें मुझे भी उसमें पार्टिसिपेट करने का अवसर मिला था। आप उसके संयोजक थे। सबसे कठिन विषय माना जाता है बुद्धिज्म में कथावस्तु ग्रंथ, क्योंकि इसमें 18 संप्रदायों का पूर्व पक्ष और उत्तर पक्ष जिस तरह से मिश्रित किया गया है, उसको निकालना बड़ा कठिन हो जाता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ऐसे कठिन विषय में आपने जो हाथ डाला था, तो उसी से आपकी प्रतिभा का पता चलता है। और अभी भी इसमें अभी बहुत काम करने की जरूरत है सर। वो वर्कशॉप जरूर हो गया है, लेकिन अभी उसकी कोई प्रोसीडिंग उस तरह से आनी चाहिए। और हिंदी में, एक इंग्लिश में भी भारतीय, मतलब जैसे एक वेस्टर्न में तो उसका ट्रांसलेशन हुआ है, लेकिन थोड़ा सा इजी इंग्लिश में भी उसका भी कोई काम होना चाहिए। तो मैं उनसे एक आज विशेष निवेदन करूंगा कि इस पर कोई अपना और आर्टिकल लिखें। साथ ही यह भी एक हमारे लिए सौभाग्य का विषय रहा है कि भोगीलाल लहरचंद इंस्टीट्यूट में आप पहले से जुड़े हुए हैं। हमारे यहाँ की एकेडमिक काउंसिल के आप मेंबर थे 2022 तक। उसके बाद विदेश में जाने के बाद थोड़ा सा गैप हुआ है, और हम लोगों ने निश्चित किया है कि आगे फिर से आपको एकेडमिक काउंसिल में जोड़ेंगे, जिससे कि हमारे भोगीलाल लहरचंद इंस्टीट्यूट में आपका मार्गदर्शन प्राप्त हो सकेगा। तो और अधिक समय ना लेकर के मैं आपसे निवेदन करता हूँ कि आप अपने व्याख्यान से हम लोगों को उपकृत करें। डॉक्टर बालाजी, धन्यवाद। और सभी सदस्यों का भी मैं हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूँ जो हमारे इस ऑनलाइन व्याख्यान माला में जुड़े हुए हैं। यूट्यूब में भी धन्यवाद।
Namaste everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Vijay Kumar Jain ji, for this wonderful, nice introduction. I hope I am audible, right?
Yeah, sir, आवाज आ रही है आपकी।
Yeah, thank you, Mohit ji, for moderating this session. Yeah, my relation with Bhogilal Leherchand Institute is long. It goes long way. I have been associated with it since GC Tripathi ji has taken the directorship, and now my other good friend and well-wisher, Professor Vijay Kumar Jain ji, is the director of it. I'm so happy about that. And also for the first time when after he became director, I am speaking on this platform. So I feel very happy about that. And my relation with Vijay Kumar Jain ji, as he has mentioned, I organized a workshop on Kathavatu. I agree with you, sir, that it requires further exploration. And in fact, I brought out a book on Anthakas, one of the 18 sects that Kathavatu debates. So I try to bring out the philosophical doctrines of Kathavatu. Springer Nature has published it. And I do agree with you that the text requires further probing and further exploration. There is less literature available on it. So thank you very much for pointing out that. It's not just Professor GC Tripathi ji. I was also closely associated with Jitendra Bhai Shah, and I thought I would have an opportunity of seeing him today on this platform because I saw his photograph on the player, but I understand that he must be busy somewhere else. Friends, today's theme that I have chosen intentionally is ethics of speech, because I felt when it comes to ethics, mostly we attributed ethics to human action. Only things that you do in social life or life, everyday life that is around you, which involves human action, that is considered to be the domain of ethics. So I think if we look at closely Jainism, it helps us to extend this conception of ethics to speech as well. And if you go to other philosophical systems of India, it goes even to the mental acts. I mean, manasa, vacha, karmana, all these three would be under the domain of human action. So that's this conception I'm exploring today because I have been working on philosophy for everyday life. Professor Vijay Kumar Jainji, while introducing me, mentioned about my 2-year stay at the University of West Indies in Jamaica, where I worked on philosophy for everyday life and started a series of lectures which were hosted by Indian High Commission in Jamaica. And those lectures became so popular that people started looking at philosophy being useful to everyday life. And that is how even Sunday evenings, people used to come for my lectures and attend and interact. I mean, that's what has encouraged me, prompted me to look at various aspects of different schools of Indian philosophy with the focus on what kind of aspect of which philosophy would be helpful to everyday life. Because most of the times in general, there is a huge misconception about philosophy, thinking that it has nothing to do with my practical everyday life concerns. This is a huge misconception, and this has to be dealt in a proper way so that the public epistemology or the mindset of people around us would have a better conception of philosophy, especially in this particular case, better conception of Jainism, Jain philosophy in their minds. So that is my intention in choosing this particular theme, ethics of speech, Jainism for everyday life. And this lecture, I have divided into different parts. In the first part, I will try to explain why ethics of speech matters. So why is it important for us? In the second section, I would deal with the grounding of ethics of speech in Jain philosophy. And further, I would try to move to parameters of ethics of speech from Jaina standpoint. And then I would deal with concept of speech ethics in Jainism. And when I am doing that, I would look at it from two dimensions, two views. One is two perspectives. One is from the perspective of karmic dimension. And the other dimension that I would look at is Vak Pramada and Vak Parisuddhi, which are very important concepts in Jain ethics when it comes to ethics of speech. And then I have picked up 3-4 stories from Jain mythology. So I would be referring to those stories so that we can draw what is the philosophical purport that we can take from these stories. And then I would also relate ethics of speech with the 3 ethical theories that we have in terms of virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarianism. And then I'll conclude this talk with some inferences further that I would draw from the whole discussion. So that's what is going to be the structure and framework of my talk. Let me begin with why ethics of speech matters. Speech is never neutral. Though we think that his speech is not something that can harm, it is neutral, that's utterly wrong. It is not merely the vibration of the sound or the flow of the words. It is action. Speech itself is action. In Jain philosophy, especially, speech or Vak yoga that we refer to is a form of activity that binds karma to the soul. No, it has a huge significance in Jainism. In social life too, speech produces effects as real as physical deeds. It can build trust or destroy relationships, bring communities together or tear them apart. And this is where I believe it is important to note J.L. Austin's speech act theory, no, which argues that speech is also an action. And speech acts, I mean, by speaking, you are also acting, you are also doing something. Okay. Of course, I'm extending it further within the domain of Jainism. We don't have to limit to the extent that J.L. Austin has developed. And if you look at the classical Indian tradition, this speech act theory gets widely expanded. In our everyday life, we speak far more than we act physically. We think that we act. This is what is the biggest domain, but actually, our speech is the biggest domain. In our everyday life, a single word spoken in anger can hurt more deeply for longer than a physical blow, while a few words of comfort can heal wounds that medicine cannot. In this sense, speech is not only a mirror of our inner state, but also a powerful tool that shapes the outer world. It's not that speech is to be regulated for the sake of your own self. It is also that for the sake of the world, speech becomes very important and central. And that is where the significance of ethics of speech lies. If you look at it from the contemporary perspective, this importance becomes even sharper in this present digital age, where tweets, WhatsApp messages, Instagram posts, and Facebook comments can reach thousands of people in seconds. Words spoken in haste or some bad thing that you can post on the social media platforms can spread rapidly, leaving behind reputational, social, and even political damage. Misinformation, trolling, hate speech, casual online gossips demonstrate how powerful and dangerous speech has become in contemporary society. Therefore, I mean, in that particular context, ethics of speech is not a luxury, but or an abstract idea, but a necessity for everyday living. It is not it is about self-control, compassion, and responsibility in a way we use our words, because words once spoken cannot be taken back, but they continue to shape lives and karmic trajectories. So this is what signifies if somebody asks, why should we talk about speech, ethics of speech? Okay. Now, let me briefly get into the grounding, philosophical grounding within Jainism that we can look at. In Jainism, the ethics of speech is rooted in the larger framework of 5 vows that we talk about, vratas that we talk about, anuvratas and mahavratas, ahimsa, satyam, asteyam, aparigraha, and brahmacharya. Among these, satya, truthfulness, specifically governs speech, but it is never an isolated vrata, vow. It is always tied to ahimsa, non-violence. This means that truth cannot be spoken at the cost of harm. Okay? Unlike modern notions that may glorify speaking one's truth, irrespective of its impact, Jaina philosophy insists that ethical truth-telling is truth expressed in harmony with non-violence. If it is not in harmony with non-violence, such kind of truth is not considered to be ethical at all. This is a very significant aspect when it comes to Jainism, ethics of speech with regard to Jainism. This principle is articulated in Tattvartha Sutra 7.7, where Satyam Vruttam Hitam Bhutanupaghatam. It is stated Satyam Vruttam Hitam Bhutanupaghatam, which means Truth is that speech which is beneficial and does not cause harm to living beings. This is to be underlined. Here, Satya is not mere correspondence to fact, no? As some people interpret it. The truth means it should correspond with the fact. It is ethical truth, truth restrained, measured, and aligned with compassion is what is called ethics of speech. Jain thinkers also outline 4 forms of sinful speech. It is not that they spoke about the positive side. They also mentioned about sinful speech, asatya bhashana, which binds karma and abstracts liberation. So unethical speech abstracts liberation as well, because it allows karma to bind the self. Okay, so this is where Mrshavada, which is falsehood, deliberate misrepresentation of reality and deception, is considered to be sinful speech. And the other form of sinful speech is Parushya which is abuse, harsh or insulting words, even if factually true. No, the point that is to be understood here is even if factually true. And then the third one is Bhinnavada, which is divisive speech. Words that create enmity or discord between people are considered to be a form of sinful speech. And then idle gossip in terms of sambhinna pralapa, frivolous and purposeless talk that often we engage with in our everyday life, where you waste your energy and attention, and then later on repent that you are not able to focus on things. No, idle speech can make your mind idle for a long time, and then later on when you try to focus your mind, it may abstract and it may not allow you to focus, because you made your mind get used to idleness. Okay, so that is how even that is considered to be a form of sinful speech. Falsehood, abuse, divisive speech, and idle gossip. These 4 are considered to be forms of sinful speech. These categories show how comprehensive the Jain view of speech is. It is not just lying that is unethical, but also abuse, discard, and even careless chatter that is also considered to be unethical. In this way, Jainism anticipates many contemporary problems, from online trolling or fake news, falsehood that we talk about, gossip-driven reputational harm, etc., etc. So many the contemporary problems that we are facing with regard to this AI, intervention of AI into our lives. Probably Jainism has anticipated many of these aspects and tried to provide us long back ethics of speech, which would be helpful to us. Thus, everyday speech must always pass 2 ethical tests. Okay, there are 2 ethical tests that Jainism prescribes. One is when you have to speak, you have to ask, is it true? Satya. Does it harm? Ahimsa. So Satya and Ahimsa become 2 ethical tests that everyday speech must always pass through. Okay. If the answer to both is yes, it is true, and no, it does not harm, then the speech can be considered ethical. If not, silence may be a better choice. No, silence. Ethics of speech also includes ethics of silence within the domain of Jainism, which is a very important thing to be noted. So by following whatever that I've said so far, if we are looking for a working definition of ethics of speech in Jainism, ethical speech, which is Satyavrata, is that which is truthful, non-harming, restrained, and beneficial, grounded in self-control and compassion. It avoids the 4 forms of sinful speech that we have already noted and becomes a discipline, vak tapas, okay, leading to liberation. So that is what is important for us. And this is where, let me briefly bring in the parameters of ethics of speech from a Jain standpoint. Based on these sources that I have mentioned above, 4 guiding parameters for ethical speech come out and try to help us. The first one is Satya. Satya means speech must not distort reality. And the second one is Ahimsa. We have already mentioned them above. Even truth must not wound. Hence, silence is better than violent truth. And then Samyama, restraint. Avoid over-speaking, gossip, and idle chatter. And then Hita. Fourth one is Hita, which is beneficence. Speech should aid others in spiritual and worldly well-being. All our speech must aid others in spiritual and worldly well-being. That is how there are certain parameters which were prescribed for speech, ethics of speech by Jainism. Let me now move to the conception of speech ethics in Jainism. Let's begin with this karmic dimension that I mentioned earlier while talking about the format of my talk. In Jain philosophy, speech is not merely expression. It is karma in action. The act of speaking is classified as one of the 3 yogas, activities of mind, speech, and body. Words like deeds generate vibrations that attract karma or karmic matter to the soul. Careless or harmful speech increases bondage, while disciplined, mindful speech reduces karmic flux. This karmic dimension highlights why everyday conversation, often treated lightly, carries profound ethical weight. What we say today shapes not just social relations, but also spiritual destiny of the soul. And I think in that particular regard, Jainism has to be celebrated widely and profoundly, because it says your speech can control or help you to reach out to your spiritual destiny as well. And what is the spiritual practice that we are talking about? Restraint of speech, which we call Vak Samyama. Vak Samyama is regarded as a form of tapas, austerity, and Samyama, control, self-control as well. To withhold a sharp word, to soften a harsh truth, or to remain silent in the face of provocation is not weakness, but strength, the strength of inner discipline, according to Jainism. The practice of, that is how the practice of mauna, silence, mauna vrata, is especially valued in Jainism. Silence is not mere absence of words, it is positive silence, a conscious choice not to harm by speech and to preserve energy for inner realization. Many Jain monks observe prolonged periods of silence because of this particular fact, regarding it as the highest form of communication. Silence being highest form of communication, because you are communicating with yourself and you're preserving your energy for inner realization. So it's a different kind of communication that happens, communicating by non-harm rather than by words that may entangle or injure. So that is how this karmic aspect and also spiritual practice of mauna become have a profound significance within Jaina philosophy. Let us now move to the other important aspect called Vak Pramada versus Vak Parisuddhi, okay, which means speech negligence and purity of speech. So how do we look at that? I think even with regard to this, with regard to Vak Pramada and Vak Parisuddhi, Jainism has a significant place in the discussion on ethics of speech. Okay, Vak Pramada, which is speech as a site of negligence. In Jain philosophy, speech is one of the 3 forms of yoga I have already mentioned. Mental, verbal, and physical. When speech is careless, harmful, and passion driven, it becomes a form of vak pramada, negligence in verbal activity. Characteristics of vak pramada are speaking impulsively or without mindfulness. Most of the times, if we observe ourselves, the silence is also self-observance. That is how Mauna Vrata is prescribed to even householders sometimes. The reason is we speak mindlessly and we speak impulsively. So these two aspects, speaking impulsively and without mindfulness, would lead to vak pramada. And another important characteristic of vak pramada is using words to deceive, manipulate, and hurt others. This is what we do every day in our lives. If we are looking at Jainism for everyday life or speech, ethics of speech for everyday life, these are very important components that we have to look at, because we often speak to deceive others and also or to manipulate the other's mind or actions or to hurt others. As I already mentioned, this is where Mauna Vrata becomes very important, which makes an individual being self-reflective, self-conscious, and self-aware of all the actions of the mind, actions of the body, and actions of the speech. The other important characteristic of vak pramada is engaging in gossip, slander, or idle chatter that distracts from spiritual focus. We have already discussed that, so I'm not getting into that. How idle chatter can disturb the mind and make the mind idle and help us or make us lose our focus and attention. The fourth important characteristic of vak pramada is speech driven by kashaya, anger, pride, deceit, and greed. The kashayas, 4 kashayas that Jainism talks about. Speech driven by kashayas become the other important characteristic of vak pramada. All these lead us to vak pramada. If you are looking at ethical and spiritual implications of this vak pramada, I think in Tattvartha Sutra 8.1, pramada is identified as one of the 5 causes of karmic bondage, bandha hetu. Thus, careless speech is not merely socially inappropriate, it is spiritually binding as well. Okay? To counteract vak pramada, the Jain monks practice mauna, and even for laypersons, speech must align with satya and ahimsa, truthfulness and non-violence. We have already noted that previously. So this is about vak pramada. If you want to avoid vak pramada, then what is it that you should do? Vak parisuddhi, purity of speech, that Jainism emphasizes. If vak pramada is the source of bondage, vak parisuddhi is its opposite, the cultivation of pure, disciplined, and compassionate speech. If we have to look at the features of vak parisuddhi, because we already looked at the features of characteristics of vak pramada, let us have a look at the features of vak parisuddhi. One of the aspects of vak parisuddhi is mindfulness and intentional communication. So here, being mindful and intentional is also being responsible of one's speech. No, when you are aware of what you are speaking, then obviously you are aware of the responsibility of the consequences of what you are speaking, and that is how vak parisuddhi becomes very important. And these two aspects, mindfulness and intentionality, become very important components of vak parisuddhi. The other interesting characteristic of vak parisuddhi is truthful, non-harming, and beneficial words. Okay, it's not enough if it is truthful, it should be non-harming and truthful, and it should also be helpful to the individual towards the spiritual growth or towards uh, uh, towards empirical well-being. The other important component of Vak Parisuddhi is speech that uplifts, instructs, and encourages spiritual and social well-being. And Vak Parisuddhi also includes guarding against passions, kashayas, influencing verbal expression. Whatever kashayas that influence your verbal expression, you have to guard yourself from that. And this is how Vak Parisuddhi would lead us to liberation. Practicing Vak Parisuddhi is a form of spiritual discipline itself, aligning with the Jain idols of tapas and samyama, austerity and self-restraint. Every word becomes an opportunity to reduce karmic accumulation and cultivate ethical clarity. For monks, it is expressed in prolonged periods of silence, except for spiritually meaningful communication. For laypersons, it is not. It is about careful, compassionate, and purposeful speech in everyday life. In short, if we are looking at this whole discussion, to sum up this whole discussion, speech is never casual. It is always karmic. Once we are aware that it is karmic and it is going to bind or liberate us, then the way we speak, with the kind of responsibility that we speak becomes very strong. And that's what is Jainism tries to focus upon. To speak wisely is also to live wisely according to Jainism. Okay. Now, let me have a look at some of the stories that I found, which would help us to understand ethics of speech in Jainism in a bit better and deeper way. Whatever points that I've already philosophically discussed, these points will get reflected in these stories as well. Let me present them to you. First one is from Dasavaikalika Sutra 8.36. Which talks about the pleasant truth. It says, a monk once asked, should one always speak the truth? And the teacher replied, speak only that which is true, pleasant, and beneficial. Do not speak the truth if it is unpleasant. Do not speak falsehood, even if it is pleasant. Okay? Do not speak falsehood, even if it is pleasant. It goes this way, that Satcham piyam hitam vayam, na satcham apiyam vayam, na asatcham piyam vayam. No? Which basically means speak what is true, pleasant, and beneficial. Do not speak truth if unpleasant, nor falsehood, or even if pleasant. No? That is how the teaching of this sutra is that speech must be filtered through truth, non-harm, and benefit. Okay. So this truth sutra basically sets the threefold filter: satya, truth, and pleasantness, priya, and benefit, hita. Okay. Truth alone is not sufficient. What it tries to emphasize is truth alone is not sufficient. Harsh truths can harm, and sweet lies can mislead. So that is how ethics of speech is not just one monotonous thing. It has a diverse kind of perspective embedded within its fold. In everyday life, speaking one's mind may be truthful, but can be ethically violent as per Jainism. White lies may seem kind, but they violate satya and bind karma. Jain ethics here offers a balanced middle path between blunt honesty and manipulative speech. Now, let me move to the second story that I have for our discussion, which is said to have found in Acharanga Sutra 1.2.3 and 4. It records that Mahavira often remained silent when questioned aggressively by hostile interlocutors. Commentaries such as Acharanga Niryukti interpret this as mauna, silence, being not mere withdrawal. Silence is not just withdrawal, but a deliberate form of restraint. No, that is what is very important. Mahavira's silence is active ethical restraint, vak tapas, not passive avoidance. It conveys that sometimes speech, however truthful, would aggravate conflict, himsa through words. In practical life, silence can be more powerful than reactionary words. Online debates, heated family arguments that we come across, no? Instead of them, it is always silence that is the best one. Jain monks practice silence as discipline, reducing karmic influx through restraint of speech, which must be noted, no? Which I have been repeating again and again. Philosophically, this reflects the Jain view of Anekantavada, and which talks about many-sidedness of the reality. Silence recognizes the limits of one's standpoint. That is, every speech of ours has to be qualified by Syadvada. The other third important story that I found would be significant to the present discussion is that of angry monk and the student. Okay, while no single canonical passage narrates this as a story, the principle is grounded in Tattvartha Sutra 7.20 and 22-23, which classifies 4 types of sinful speech that I have already mentioned earlier in terms of falsehood, abuse, divisive talk, and gossip. Jain commentarial texts such as Uttaradhyayana Sutra, chapter 24 and 25, illustrate how monks are warned against harsh speech, even when doctrinally correct. No, you may say that it is doctrinally correct, but even then, if it is harsh, then the monks were warned not to state it. Analysis, if we try to analyze that, ethical failure is not in the content, but in the tone as well. No, it's not with regard to the content, but it is with regard to the tone as well. Jain thought recognizes verbal violence as karmically binding. Harsh truths can be more violent than gentle silence. If we look at it from the everyday life perspective, your words may be true, but if they land like arrows, you are committing vag himsa. No, that is also a kind of himsa. This underlines the speech, that the speech act, I mean, ethical speech is not just what is said, but how it is said as well. And now let me go to the last story that I would like to talk about, the story of Gautama's harshness and repentance. Jain narrative literature, which especially Uttaradhyayana Sutra 23 and 24, and commentarial stories like Kalpa Sutra and Bhagavati Sutra recount how Gautama, Mahavira's chief disciple, sometimes erred in speech or conduct, then performed pratikramana, a kind of ritual repentance. Gautama harshly rebuked once another monk who erred in practice. Later, he realized his mistake and sought forgiveness. This story highlights that even enlightened disciplines are not immune to lapses of speech. The Jain discipline is not perfection. Friends, please note down this point. The Jain discipline is not perfection, but constant correction. Correcting oneself constantly is something that is very important. Acknowledging fault, alochana, repenting, pratikramana, resolving not to repeat. Okay, so these are the important aspects of constant correction that this text tries to emphasize. Every day, if we are looking at it from the everyday life perspective, ethical speech is a practice, discipline, not a fixed state. You cannot say that ethics of speech is a state, fixed state. No, it is a practice that every day you have to constantly correct yourself and cultivate within yourself. Mistakes are inevitable, but reflection and correction prevent karmic accumulation. And that is how there are 4 stories that I have narrated so far. One is Dasavaikalika, where speech must balance truth, pleasantness, and benefit is emphasized. And then Mahavira's silence. Sometimes the highest ethical speech is silence. And the third story is Angry Monk, where every truth can be violent if spoken harshly. And we also looked at Gautama's repentance, where speech lapses must be corrected through reflection and atonement. This progression can shape your talk. I mean, this progression is important for us, and it also can regulate our speech, our talk, and our speech. Now, let me briefly talk about 3 ethical theories that we refer to when we look at the ethics as a part of philosophy, which are in terms of virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarian. I mean, if we see speech to be an act, then every act can be analyzed into 3 components, where you will find an agent, the action itself, and the consequences. Okay, the agent would be there, and then the action would be there, whatever may be the action. In this particular case, action is speech and the consequences of the speech. Okay, the agent who is speaking, the act of speech, and then the consequences of the speech. If we have these 3 things in front of us for the sake of analysis, then if you see ethics to be in the consequences of the speech, then that would be utilitarian perspective. If you want to say, if you see ethics to be in the act of speech itself, the speech itself must be performed like a duty, if you argue, then that is the deontological perspective. If you look at it from the perspective of the agent and the intention of the agent, then the virtue ethics comes into picture. So let me briefly talk about these 3 aspects, these 3 perspectives of ethics in terms of virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarianism in relation to speech act, ethics of speech from Jainism. As I mentioned, virtue ethics is agent-centered. For example, in Aristotle's virtue ethics, moral excellence lies in the golden mean, the balance between extremes. So if we apply this to speech, speech must avoid extremes of silence, I mean, in terms of cowardice and suppression, and then excessive bluntness, which is in terms of recklessness and cruelty. The virtue is measured wise communication. When you have a measured wise communication, that's what is considered to be ethics of speech. The Jain parallels that we find are Jain Anekantavada, where many-sidedness of reality is emphasized, and Syadvada, which is a kind of qualified assertion. Every statement, since it is limited from a particular perspective, it has to be qualified by Syad. These 2 mirror Aristotle's golden mean. That is how we can see virtue ethics, the symptoms of virtue ethics strongly in Jainism. One cannot make absolute claims, ekanta, because human knowledge, vyavaharanaya, is conditional and perspectival. Hence, every utterance must carry the humility of Syat from a certain standpoint, which is both epistemic caution and ethical responsibility. So that is how virtuous speech is balanced, qualified, and humble, reflecting both prudence and compassion. Okay, let us now move to deontological ethics. Deontology basically says duty for duty's sake, which means you should perform ethics of speech. You should speak truth because it is your duty. Okay. And we find this deontological perspective as well strongly in Jainism. And in general, the Western tradition attributes deontological ethics to Immanuel Kant, where morality rests in adhering to duty irrespective of its consequences. Irrespective of its consequences, you should, I mean, ethics, morality rests in adhering to the duty. Applied to speech, truth as a vrata, a categorical obligation. One must not lie, distort, or manipulate speech as practice of this becomes one's duty. And Jain parallels that we find is Tattvartha Sutra 7.7, where truth is that speech which does not harm living beings. No, which says that Tattvartha Sutra says 7.7 says, truth is that speech which does not harm living beings. The duty is not just to speak the truth, but to speak it with qualification, acknowledging the standpoint and non-violence. That becomes very important. Satya is a vow binding on both laypersons and ascetics, though the degree of strictness varies. To summarize the whole discussion, deontological ethics in Jainism emphasizes duty to truth, but a truth tempered by the higher duty of non-violence. No, that is what is very important. Now, coming to consequentialism or utilitarian ethics, which is outcome-centered one, the rightness, which argues that rightness of an act depends on its consequences, maximizing the benefit and maximizing harm. Applied to speech, words should be chosen for their outcomes, clarity, understanding, and harmony. Speech that escalates conflict or entrenches division fails the ethical test. Okay, so that is how one has to be conscious of the consequences of the speech, and that is how one has to be responsible in saying what one is saying. So we find many parallels within Jainism. Jain texts stress that speech should be hita, beneficial, that I have already mentioned, and priya, pleasant, besides being true. Practical guidance for everyday life, communicating effectively without creating trouble through extreme or absolute stances. This links to the idea that even a truth that causes harm is ethically compromised. Okay, if your truth is harming someone, then it has ethically got compromised. So that is how consequentialist ethics of speech demands attention to the impact of words, not just their truth or intention. To synthesize this with everyday philosophy, virtue ethics, cultivating syat, which means humility, balance, and perspectival awareness, becomes very important from virtue ethics standpoint within Jainism. From the deontological ethics standpoint, honor Satya as a O, but always with ahimsa, always qualified with ahimsa, and that is how it becomes one's duty, and that is how this perspective becomes a deontological one. And looking at it from the consequentialist ethics, speak so as to foster harmony, benefit, and clarity according to Jainism. And that is basically consequentialist. Together, these three perspectives frame speech not merely an expression, but as profoundly ethical act, shaping both the speaker's soul and the community's well-being. So that is how I see that. If somebody asks a question like whether ethics of speech in Jainism is either virtue-oriented or deontological or consequentialist, I would say it definitely includes all these three theories, and it is much beyond that as well. So, I mean, the ethical theories, established ethical theories of the West may not be able to comprehensively, not any one of them would be able to comprehensively explain the ethical stance of ethics of speech of Jainism. This is a very important aspect that one should make note of. Now, to conclude, in Jainism, speech is never just speech. It is karma in motion. To live ethically, one must cultivate Vag Samyama, no, discipline of speech, which includes truth, non-harming, beneficial, and sometimes even being silent. Ethics of speech then is not an abstract philosophy, but a daily practice that shapes relationships, society, and even one's own soul. And this is where I would once again emphasize the point that ethics of speech or ethics of silence is useful not just to the individual for one's own progress of spirituality. It is useful in the social life and political life and the life that we live with the surrounding world, not just human world, but non-human world as well, uh, uh, including plants and animals and the nature that we have around us. I thank everyone for their patient listening. And I once again thank Professor Vijay Kumar Jain ji for this wonderful opportunity that is given to me.
सर, मैं तो सभी अपने श्रोताओं की तरफ से आपका पुनः पुनः अभिनंदन कर रहा हूं कि आपने हमारे इन जैन सिद्धांतों को और हमारी जो प्रैक्टिस है उसको इतना सम्मान दिया है और पुनः हम लोगों को प्रेरित किया है। अभी आज हमारे जीतू भाई को जोड़ना था लेकिन नहीं जुड़ पाए हैं। हमारे संस्थान में प्रोफेसर चंद्रशेखर जी जो कि वेदांत के विद्वान हैं, मैं उनसे निवेदन करता हूं कि वो आज कृतज्ञता ज्ञापित करके हम लोगों का औपचारिक धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करें। प्रोफेसर चंद्रशेखर जी। हेलो।
जय जिनेन्द्र। हेलो, मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
जी सर, आ रही आवाज आ रही।
हाँ, जय जिनेन्द्र। भोगीलाल लहरचंद इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ इंडोलॉजी के द्वारा समायोजित इस 31वीं मासिक व्याख्यान माला के अंतर्गत आज मुख्य वक्ता के रूप में समुपस्थित समादरणीय दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के दर्शन विभाग के आचार्य प्रोफेसर बालगणपति देवरकोंडा गारू और हमारे श्रुतरत्नाकर के निदेशक प्रोफेसर जितेंद्र भाई शाह जी जो किसी कारण से नहीं जुड़ पाए हैं, और हमारे BLII इंस्टीट्यूट के माननीय निदेशक प्रोफेसर विजय कुमार जैन जी और समुपस्थित सभी सुधी विद्वद्गण। आज एक सुंदर व्याख्यान सुनने को मिला, एथिक्स ऑफ स्पीच, जैनिज्म फॉर एवरीडे लाइफ। वक्ता ने बहुत अच्छे तरह से अपनी बात को यहाँ पर हम सबके सामने रखा, क्योंकि the speech by Devarkonda Garu is well planned and well framed and nicely delivered. ये हम कह सकते हैं क्योंकि उनका जो स्पीच है, उनका जो भाषण है नैतिकता के आधारभूत, वो जैनिज्म पर केंद्रित रहा, क्योंकि जैनिज्म फॉर एवरीडे लाइफ नो डाउट, बट I say Jainism is way of life. इसको मैं इस रूप से देखता हूं क्योंकि जैनिज्म में वो सारी बातें हैं जो जैन धर्म को पुष्ट करती हैं, और जैन धर्म के पराकाष्ठा तक जैन धर्म के सिद्धांतों को ले जाने में जिन बातों पर हम ध्यान देते हैं उसमें सबसे पहला है नैतिकता। उसी पर आज मुख्य वक्ता ने अपना ध्यान केंद्रित हम सबका कराया, क्योंकि एथिक्स, जिस बात को हम एथिक्स के रूप में जानते हैं, तो उसको स्पीच एथिक्स को इन्होंने बहुत अच्छे ढंग से एथिक्स ऑफ साइलेंस के रूप में भी इसको अंत में परिणति इसकी दिखाई है। तो मैं ज़्यादा ना कहकर, क्योंकि मैं भी दर्शन का एक छात्र रहा हूँ, तो मैं थोड़ा सा आपकी बातों को हमारे शुद्धी श्रोतागण को एक थोड़ा सा एक पिंडी भूत के रूप में रखना चाहूँगा, क्योंकि एथिक्स के जहाँ पर बात आती है और स्पीच जहाँ पर उसको पुष्ट करती है और स्पीच के माध्यम से नैतिकता का प्रसार जब हम करते हैं, तब उसमें सत्य और अहिंसा की बात तो बिल्कुल आती है। और वाक संयम की, आप वाक परिशुद्धि की जो आपने बात कही, बिल्कुल सही है। वाक परिशुद्धि यदि नहीं है तो फिर वाक में उस पवित्रता नहीं रहती है और उस वाक जो है वो गिनती में नहीं आती है। इसलिए हमारे इसमें हिंदू धर्म में भी साइलेंस को हमने बहुत ही अच्छी तरह से इसको परिभाषित किया है। और मुझे याद आता है कि मुनिना मौनम व्याख्यातम शिष्यास्तु छिन्न संशयाः। मुनि ने मौन ही व्याख्यान के रूप में दिया और सारे शिष्य उसको सुनने, गुरु को सुनने के लिए बैठे थे, वो छिन्न संशय हो गए, उनके संशय चकनाचूर हो गया। तो मौन का जो महत्व है वो अपने हिंदू धर्म में भी हम कई प्रकार से इसको वर्णित करते हैं, और जैनियों में खास तौर पर मौन को एक आभूषण के रूप में देखा है। मौनम परम भूषणम। और तत्वार्थ सूत्र में आचार्य उमा स्वाति ने भी इस बात को इंगित किया है, और 4 कषायों को बताते हुए क्रोध, मान, माया और लोभ, इन 4 कषायों को एक एक कषाय के 4 उपभेद बताकर 16 कषायों का वर्णन किया जाता है। और उसमें वाक परिशुद्धि और वाक संयम, और कहीं अतिरंजित होने से वाक प्रमाद भी हो जाता है। और इन वाक प्रमाद से बचने के लिए हमें जहां तक हो सके मौन का धारण करना चाहिए। और स्यादवाद को आपने अनेकांतवाद स्यादवाद के रूप में जोड़कर एक अच्छा विवरण आपने यहाँ पर दिया। और स्यादवाद को सप्तभंगी के रूप में भी जाना जाता है। और जो आपने 4 कथाओं के माध्यम से 4 यहाँ पर उद्धृत किया है, दशवैकालिक सूत्र, आचारांग सूत्र, उत्तराध्ययन सूत्र, कल्प सूत्र, तत्वार्थ सूत्र, इन सभी उद्ग्रंथों में मैं कहता हूं कि सारी एक हमारे सूत्र नहीं है, ये हमारे जीवन शैली है। जैन धर्म में इसको हम जैन जीवन शैली का, आचारांग सूत्र को जीवन शैली के रूप में लेते हैं। और आचारांग निरुक्ति में जो मौन पर बात कही गई है, वो आपने बहुत अच्छी तरह से यहाँ पर उसको उद्धृत करके इसका पल्लवन किया है। क्योंकि सत्य ही सब कुछ है, सत्य से परे कुछ नहीं है। सत्यम ब्रूयात प्रियम ब्रूयात न ब्रूयात सत्यम प्रियम प्रियंच नानृतम ब्रूयात, इस तरह से उपनिषद भी मानते हैं। और सर्वम सत्य प्रतिष्ठितम, उपनिषद कहती है सब कुछ सत्य में ही प्रतिष्ठित है, इसलिए सत्य का ही सहारा लेना चाहिए। हरिश्चंद्र की भी कथा सबको मालूम है। तो इस तरह से कथाओं उपकथाओं के माध्यम से भी हिंदू धर्म में सत्य की ही स्थापना की गई है। और जैन धर्म में भी उसी के अनुरूप जैन धर्म में भी सत्य को ही श्रेष्ठ माना गया है, और सत्य के अलावा कुछ भी श्रेष्ठ नहीं है। तो आपने बहुत अच्छी तरह से अपने बातों को यहाँ पर रखा, हम बहुत आभारी हैं। क्योंकि इस तरह से व्याख्यान बहुत कम सुनने को मिलते हैं। क्योंकि आपने जो शीर्षक लिया उसी से मुझे लग रहा था कि एथिक्स स्पीच पर ही आपका ध्यान आकर्षित आप कराएंगे हम सबका। और जैनिज्म एवरीडे लाइफ, तो ये तो एक धारणा है और एक कल्पना है और एक संकल्पना भी है, और संकल्पना के रूप सद्रूप देने का भी एक प्रयास है। और इस तरह से व्याख्यान हमारे भोगीलाल लहचंद इंस्टीट्यूट के माध्यम से हम कराते रहते हैं। आदरणीय हमारे निदेशक जी इसमें बहुत तत्पर रहते हैं कि शुद्धि श्रोतागण को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जैन धर्म के और जैन सिद्धांतों के, जैन आगमों के बारे में जानकारी प्राप्त हो। इस तरह से प्रतिष्ठित विद्वानों से व्याख्यान कराते हैं। उसी कड़ी में आज आपका व्याख्यान एक सुवर्ण पुष्प के रूप में माला में गुंथित हुआ है। तो हम सब बहुत अपने शुद्धि श्रोतागण की ओर से और हमारे BLII की ओर से, आदरणीय हमारे जितेंद्र भाई शाह जी की ओर से हम आपके बहुत बहुत आभारी हैं और अपना हार्दिक आभार प्रकट करते हैं। और इस जूम माध्यम से जुड़े सुधी श्रोतागण डॉक्टर सुषमा सिंघवी जी, डॉक्टर पवन जैन जी और सुबोध श्रीवास्तव जी, डॉक्टर वीचंद जैन जी, मनोरमा जी, डॉक्टर मधु काले जी, डॉक्टर रागा जैन जी, रूपल आहूजा जी, आलोक तिवारी जी, पुष्पक कांतिदा तिवारी जी, इन सब के भी हम आभार प्रकट करते हैं। और क्योंकि हर महीने हम इस तरह से व्याख्यान आयोजित करते हैं और जितने हमारे श्रोतागण हैं वो हर बार जुड़ते हैं, हर महीने जुड़ते हैं। निवेदन सभी से रहता है कि ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा संख्या में जुड़ें और इस व्याख्यानों का लाभ उठाएं। और आप आए और आपका समय बहुत मूल्यवान होता है, फिर भी आपने यहाँ पर अपनी स्वीकृति प्रदान कर यहाँ पर आकर हम सबका ज्ञानवर्धन किया। इसलिए मैं BLII की ओर से पुनः एक बार और सभी श्रोतागण के ओर से और बारंबार आपको अपना आभार प्रकट करता हूँ। जय जिनेन्द्र, नमो जिनाणम।
मैं डॉक्टर चंद्रशेखर जी के प्रति भी कृतज्ञता ज्ञापित करता हूँ कि वो हमारी संस्था के लिए समर्पित होकर के सेवा कर रहे हैं। आज का जो हमारे जो व्याख्यान है वो सभी YouTube में सुरक्षित रहते हैं और हमारी वेबसाइट में भी उनको रखा जाता है, इसलिए भले ही यहाँ संख्या कम होती है, वो लॉन्ग टर्म में उनका उपयोग होता है। हेलो
जी सर, आवाज आ रही है।
हाँ, तो बस इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ में मोहित जी को भी धन्यवाद दे रहे हैं कि वो उन्होंने आज का यह कार्यक्रम संचालित किया। व्योम जी ने भी इसमें सहयोग दिया था और अभी हम लोग विदा लेते हैं। पुनः हम अपने वक्ता बालाजी का हार्दिक अभिनंदन करते हुए उनके प्रति कृतज्ञता ज्ञापित करते हैं। सभी को जय जिनेन्द्र।
जय जय,
अनुमति
नमस्कार।
दीजिए हम लोग इसको समाप्त करने के लिए। चलिए।
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vijay Kumar Jain ji, and thank you so much, Chandrasekhar Garu, for that wonderful, interpretation of what I said in Hindi. Thank you so much for that. Thanks to all the
ठीक है, धन्यवाद।
invitees and people who have joined.